Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about Act 5, Scene 1 of Macbeth by Shakespeare. So as per usual, you need to be familiar with this scene. You could have read it, listened to it, watched it, or studied it before, and you're using this video either to refresh your memory or to get a deeper understanding of it ahead of your exams. Again, following the same pattern, I'll start by summarising what happens in this scene. We'll then explore the key characters, themes, contextual knowledge and quotes you may want to memorise for your assessment, and I'll leave you with a question you can answer at the end of the video if you wish to do so. So, what happens in Act 5, Scene 1 of Macbeth? Well, it's quite a short scene, and in this scene we are in Lady Macbeth's apartments, according to the stage direction. That basically means Lady Macbeth's bedroom. We have two new characters we haven't seen before. We have a doctor and a gentlewoman. A gentlewoman is basically Lady Macbeth's servant. You might call her a chambermaid or a lady in waiting. Her job is to look after Lady Macbeth. And both the doctor and the gentlewoman observe Lady Macbeth sleepwalk. Now, when Lady Macbeth sleepwalks, she does some actions with her hands, which sort of mimic washing her hands. And not only that, she speaks, and in her speech, she reveals her guilt, her madness, and her sickness, resulting from the deaths that she's been involved with. She has been directly involved with King Duncan's death, which we can call regicide, and she also seems to know about Banquo's death, and Macduff's family's death. Even though Macbeth orchestrated that more than Lady Macbeth did, she is aware of it, and the guilt is playing on her. The doctor and the gentlewoman observe all of this, and then the doctor pronounces that he has no such cure for her disease, the disease being sleepwalking and guilt and madness. So, who are our key characters in this scene? Well, we have the doctor, and in the stage directions, he's referred to as a doctor of physic. Now, I've had students in the past ask, does that mean physics as in science? I don't think so. I think a doctor of physic is a physician. A physician is a medical doctor who helps people without using surgery. And the doctor is presented by Shakespeare as shocked. Perhaps the doctor is shocked because he cannot provide a medical explanation for Lady Macbeth sleepwalking, or perhaps, and I believe this second interpretation, the doctor is shocked at what Lady Macbeth has revealed, that she has committed a regicidal act, and of all the revelation of her murders and misdeeds she has committed throughout the play. I think the doctor's quite a moral character, so therefore the doctor comes across as quite shocked at what we learn in this scene. We have the gentlewoman, and she's very loyal to Lady Macbeth. I do like the gentlewoman. When the doctor enters the scene, he asks her, "What have you heard Lady Macbeth say while she was sleepwalking?" And the gentlewoman refused to tell the doctor. She says, "I will not report after her," because the gentlewoman knows what Lady Macbeth says is incriminating. It shows she's guilty for crimes. So the gentlewoman is loyal to Lady Macbeth, and she's concerned for her lady's health. I believe she is the one who went to get the doctor in the first place. So the gentlewoman would have been staying in Lady Macbeth's apartment or room or chamber. She would have noticed Lady Macbeth sleepwalking, talking to herself, miming, washing her hands, and she went to get a doctor to try and help the situation. Then we have Lady Macbeth herself, who really is the starring character in this scene, and she comes across quite negatively. She comes across as guilty. Remember that blood is symbolic of guilt, so she's trying to wash metaphorical blood off her hands. It shows that she has a guilt-ridden mind, particularly for the killing of King Duncan, but also she's aware of Banquo's demise and Macduff's family's demise, and takes some guilt for that as well. We have madness here. So to sleep usually involves lying down and not moving and having a lot of rest. So by sleepwalking, it's symbolic of maybe having a mind that isn't at peace. Remember, sleep is symbolic of peace. So if you're sleepwalking, you're not at peace. That really links to the portrayal of her being mad mentally and being sick physically. So the sleepwalking links to guilt, madness, and sickness. And then you can have a little debate amongst yourself. Is this sleepwalking a supernatural punishment or a natural punishment? Does the sleepwalking arise from Lady Macbeth's heat-oppressed brain, if I want to reuse that quote from earlier in the play? Is it from the stress her mind is under? Or is it a supernatural punishment, perhaps from God, for Lady Macbeth trying to break the natural order? I personally believe it's the second one, but I think you could put up a good argument for it being the first one as well. So, what themes are there in this scene? Well, I just mentioned this idea of it being a supernatural punishment. We know that sleeping is natural. All living creatures need to sleep in order to rest and recover, and when humans sleep, we usually lie down and we don't move much. So sleepwalking is not normal, it's abnormal. It's not natural, it's supernatural. So I personally see this as a supernatural punishment from God, punishing Lady Macbeth for breaking the divine right of kings' great chain of being and natural order. That's my personal interpretation. We get the theme of order versus chaos. So before Macbeth and Lady Macbeth committed regicide, Scotland was an ordered place to live under King Duncan, because the divine right of kings hadn't been broken. But now Lady Macbeth and Macbeth have broken the divine right of kings, and they did this by killing King Duncan, which ruined the great chain of being, which suggests that kings are higher in the order than normal men and women. As a result of this, God has punished them by breaking the natural order. The organisation of the universe has sort of gone topsy-turvy. We've had some descriptions of Scotland where prey birds are now killing predator birds, where there's eternal darkness, where there's suffering, and we now see this chaos manifested in Lady Macbeth's body. Again, in my opinion, I think she's really responsible, because after Macbeth writes her the letter about the prophecy to become King of Scotland, she's the one who really gets the ball rolling, puts the gears in motion, in my opinion. And I think this is her punishment for her ambition in becoming queen. We have the theme of guilt. It occurs again in this scene. Now, is her guilt divine or natural? It goes back to this idea I mentioned earlier. Is this guilt coming from her dwelling and ruminating and thinking about her past sins, and particularly the deaths she and her husband has been involved in? Or is this sleepwalking, this guilt, a divine punishment from God? I personally believe the second, but I think you could argue both in an essay. And the theme of madness, again, we've touched upon it before, but she's losing control of herself at this stage. She cannot even sleep, which is one of the basic human functions she needs to do. She can't even do that. She's lost control. Contrast this to how much she was in control at the start of the play. When she received the letter, she called on those spirits to unsex her, to fill her full of cruelty. She seemed to know what she was doing. She was messing with the supernatural. She was really ambitious. She had a whole plan in action, and it has gone catastrophically wrong, and it's backfired, and it's left her mad. Okay, key context. I've mentioned these three, and when I taught them in previous videos, I always teach them together because I think they're closely linked. The divine right of kings is the idea that God chooses the king on the throne. And the great chain of being is this idea that the universe has a hierarchy, an order of importance, with God at the top, then kings and queens, then normal people, then animals, then plants, all the way through to rocks and dirt at the bottom. And the natural order is this idea that God has maintained the universe, and then if anything happens to break the divine right of kings or the great chain of being, the natural order will turn into chaos. So those three things are closely linked, and it's important to note that Lady Macbeth has broken the divine right of kings. She didn't physically do it. Macbeth stabbed King Duncan, but she orchestrated and manipulated Macbeth into doing it, so she has to accept some of the guilt. In doing that, an average man and woman has usurped, overtaken a king or queen in the great chain of being. That's broken the great chain of being, and as a result, God has taken away the natural order, and there is chaos in the natural world. I think it's also worth reminding ourselves that in the Jacobean era and in Alban, Scotland, so Jacobean England and Alban, Scotland, both groups of people believed in a Christian God. So the idea that this sleepwalking punishment is a supernatural punishment from God, it might seem a bit strange to a modern audience, but in the time the play was set and in the time the audience watched it, it would have been perhaps an accepted belief that God would punish Lady Macbeth for her sins, particularly the treasonous and sacrilegious crime of regicide. We have Shakespeare revealing his thoughts on gender here. Women are seen as more delicate than men back in the Jacobean era and the Alban era, and that is presented in this scene. Macbeth is just as guilty as Lady Macbeth. You could probably argue he's more guilty because he was the one who actually stabbed King Duncan, and he was the one who actually talked to the murderers to get Banquo and Macduff's family killed. However, whilst he has sort of stress and madness and guilt, he copes with it better than Lady Macbeth. He's not sleepwalking, he's not portrayed as weak as she is. And that's to do with gender stereotypes at the time. So, here we have key quotations from the scene. "I have seen her rise from her bed, yet all this while in a most fast sleep." This quote said by the gentlewoman basically proves that Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking. She's rising from her bed, she's getting up, she's walking, but she's doing it whilst most fast asleep. Lady Macbeth says quite a lot in her sleepwalking state, and a lot of it is incriminating. That means revealing her guilt in a crime. "Out, damned spot. Out, I say." This is a very famous quote. Here the spot is a metaphor for blood. So when I've seen it performed, Lady Macbeth is looking at her hand and she's metaphorically seeing King Duncan's blood, and she's metaphorically trying to wash it out using mime. Look at the exclamation marks, and look at maybe the word damned, zoom in on that and the connotations of hell. Speaking of hell, Lady Macbeth says hell is murky. So while she's sleepwalking, when people sleep they sometimes dream. Here Lady Macbeth is dreaming of hell. I would argue it's probably more of a nightmare than a dream, but it shows you her mental state. She's thinking and dwelling on her sins, and if you sin a lot, you go to hell. That's a traditional Christian belief that would have been upheld in 16th century England and 11th century Scotland. Yet who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him? This rhetorical question is the incriminating evidence, the evidence you would need to prosecute Lady Macbeth. She's basically confessing to her involvement in the regicide of King Duncan. Here King Duncan is the old man. "The Thane of Fife had a wife." This quote is there's many things you could explore. It sounds a bit like a nursery rhyme. "The Thane of Fife, he had a wife." This maybe reveals that mentally Lady Macbeth is sort of reverting back to a more childish state. I've heard that argument before. And again, this is another example of incriminating evidence. I don't think she spoke to the murderers who dealt those fatal blows to Macduff's wife and children, but maybe through her husband she's learnt of this and she is accepting some of the guilt. Maybe she's realised that she has started herself and Macbeth on this path of murder, and they are so steeped in blood, if I want to use that quote again, that she has to accept some of the guilt for his actions. We have another rhetorical question. "What, will these hands ne'er be clean?" Ne'er meaning never. Again, this rhetorical question seems to suggest a sort of eternal and never-ending guilt. And this links with this Christian idea of heaven as an eternal reward and hell as an eternal punishment. And we know from the words damned and hell that Lady Macbeth seems to think she's going to hell. And 11th century Albans and 16th century Jacobeans would also agree. If you commit regicide, if you kill innocent people, God will punish you with an eternity of suffering in hell. "All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand." I only learnt this quite recently, but apparently perfume originated from the Arab world, Arabia. So she is saying that her hands smell of blood. Blood has a kind of sort of metallic, irony smell, and this smell, this sense, is making her feel guilty. So even if she poured all of the perfume from the whole of the Arabic Empire, the Arabic kingdom, her hand will still smell of blood. This is an exaggeration, a hyperbole, which reveals how much guilt she is feeling. Here the perfumes metaphorically represent something that can wash away her guilt. She wants to try and wash away the blood, the smell of the blood. I think the perfumes here represent forgiveness, but even if she had all the forgiveness in the world, it wouldn't sweeten the smell of her hand. She is that guilty. Her hand stinks of murder. And the final incriminating bit of evidence, Banquo's buried. This sort of alliterative short phrase reveals that she knew her husband had Banquo murdered, and she accepts some of the guilt for it, perhaps because of earlier in the play when she manipulated him into killing King Duncan. Maybe she believes she set him down on that slippery slope of murder that he has eventually slid down and killed Banquo and Macduff's family along the way. A few more quotes. The doctor says, "This disease is beyond my practice." Here the disease is sleepwalking, and this really shows that nothing natural can save her. The doctor has no medicine, no herbs, no charms that can help her get rid of this. And this is another piece of evidence which makes me think that the sleepwalking is supernaturally inflicted. It's not something a doctor can fix naturally. Lady Macbeth then says something very profound, and this is like a life lesson. What's done cannot be undone. If you make a mistake in life, you cannot undo it. Maybe you can ask for forgiveness and try to fix what you've done, but Lady Macbeth certainly hasn't done that. She has done some serious crimes, such as regicide, and that cannot be undone. She must now live with the consequences, such as sleepwalking. And then the doctor ends off again with a very profound statement. Unnatural deeds do breed unnatural troubles. The unnatural deed here really links to this idea of the great chain of being, divine right of kings, and natural order. The unnatural deed was Lady Macbeth and Macbeth committing regicide and therefore breaking the divine right of kings, therefore breaking the great chain of being, and in doing so the natural world has been turned into chaos. The natural order has been removed. So nature has become unnatural because of the deeds that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth committed earlier in the play. So, what should you do? Well, hopefully as you've been watching, you've been making some notes on a physical copy of the play, maybe highlighting, annotating, and you can answer this question if you want to practice some analytical writing. What is the significance of Lady Macbeth sleepwalking in Act 5, Scene 1 of Macbeth? In this answer, you could explore whether the sleepwalking is natural or supernatural. You could explore what the sleepwalking represents. You've got symbolism you could explore with the blood and with sleep. You've got plenty of quotes you can unpick with some techniques there. You could go back earlier on in the play and sort of quote and make references to what Lady Macbeth has done earlier in the play. There's a whole range of different angles you can take on answering this question. Well, if you liked this video and found it useful for your Shakespeare revision, please give it a like. Please also subscribe to my channel so you get the rest of my Macbeth analytical videos. And feel free to leave a comment if you think there's anything that I've missed out or that you would like to share. Well, thank you for your attention, and I'll see you on the next one.